Welcome to the Shadow the Script podcast. I'm your host, Jared May. This is where we debunk the mainstream media, and it is your designated escape from the larger outlets like ESPN, CBS, Barstool Sports, all those mainstream paid-for agenda-ran organizations. This is the place to be to get the truth and authentic takes without a paid-for agenda. But look, today is our NFL edition. We just did the college football one on Tuesday. I thought it was a tremendous success. I really enjoyed going through the top 25, and every day of every second of every week, 25-8, I'm always constantly reminded how much better of a product college football has been, even with all of the NIL stuff and the brand loyalty kind of withering away. And there are certainly problems within the committee and within the aspect of college football, for sure. I'm not going to deny that. But when I look at NFL, I turn on the games and I'm like, man, they got blocked field goals. We got missed field goals. We got people sitting out. They're hurt. They're kind of hurt. They're not injured. Like, are you hurt? Are you injured? We're out this week. We're out the next week too. I'm a little banged up in the head. I'm a little banged up in the shoulder. I'm out. And so the product there has been highly frustrating because every week there's somebody that is it's just riddled with injuries throughout. And IR has become extremely common. We might as well rest him for 3 or 4 weeks. We can deal without him. He doesn't have to play, and so I don't know. Yeah, I'm just a little upset with what the NFL has had to offer over the past 2 seasons. But nonetheless, I do want to cover it, and I do love watching NFL football at the end of the day. So, a couple of things I want to highlight. Obviously, I just released the STS power rankings yesterday. So, to be honest with you, it was extremely difficult to make, just to kind of squeeze in 10 football teams into a top 10. It's a lot different than college football. But when you look at it, how I've viewed the top 10 power rankings was controversial, because I looked at, in the NFC South division, or sorry, NFC West division with the 49ers, the Seahawks, and the Rams. I'm like, well, I don't know which team to pick. I would say Seattle has better wins, but then they also lost to the 49ers at the beginning of the season, 17-13. But I guess the 49ers at the time had a more compact roster that was less injury riddled than it is currently. And one could argue that as well. But then Seattle turns around and this week and defeats Jacksonville, who I had in the top 10, 20-12. And to Jacksonville's credit, their defense is playing pretty swell to start the season, and they are still kind of the leading favorites. But as we know, in the AFC South, it just continuously is a circus of which team could make it to 9 wins to get into the playoffs, and then nobody's scared of them. And Shane Waldron, on the offensive side of the football, coaching the Jacksonville Jaguars, there's a lot of discrepancies that go on within the wide receiver core there. I think that's why you're seeing a lack of production in Brian Thomas Jr. But, one thing I want to, and I'll get to Seattle here in a little bit, I want to start with the Philadelphia Eagles losing to the Giants on Thursday Night Football. And it's a short week. That's one thing that should be noted for sure. But it continues to say, I had a lot of people complain about having Philadelphia number 1. And I look at the Philadelphia Eagles and I see this crazy stacked roster where they're not really riddled with injuries. If anything, they're riddled with stupidity, with like Jalen Carter spitting on people. And that's really the only thing I could possibly think of. I think Quinion Mitchell might have went out with an injury on the defensive back side, but they've got Hubert Jean has played well in the slot or in the nickel. Reed Blankenship's a very physical downhill safety. You got when Quinion Mitchell was in, he was very solid. Zach Bond is obviously one of the better or greatest linebackers currently playing right now, and I think that's a credit to the front 5, the front 7 of the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and all these different guys. I think they just got Nakobe Dean back recently, so the defense is strong. But what gets Philadelphia into trouble, and I've said this countless times over running this podcast for the last 2.5, 3 years, is when you force Jalen Hurts to throw the football. And that, I would say, the the marker on that is 35 attempts. You get him to throw the football, you have a much better chance of winning the football game. You do. And I understand that like an Eagles fan or somebody that's a pro Jalen Hurts type of guy, which I'm not very much pro Jalen Hurts, to be quite frank. And if you've been listening to this podcast, then you would definitely understand that. But I can understand, I know for a fact that I can hear it already in my head, just people saying, well, he doesn't have to throw. You know, they can get away with him not making these risk plays, and then when they have to make these risky plays, Jalen Hurts converts because that's what he does. That's how he competes. That's the drive within him. That's the discipline and the leadership of Jalen Hurts, which makes him a top 5 quarterback. And it's like, no, it does not. It does not. That's not an automatic thing. What we're viewing is the modern day Joe Flacco, where it's like, okay, we have a pretty good defense and some weapons on the side, and they were nowhere near what Jalen Hurts currently has. But you look at the NFL films and you watch those targets towards A.J. Brown, and they're inaccurate. They're underneath the sticks. Like, they're not exposing A.J. Brown's greatest asset, and that's the deep threat ability. That's the man-to-man crossing routes. That's getting open past the sticks and using his physical mass to basically get yards after contact, yards after catch. And they're just sticking with screens and in routes and treating him like he's Deebo Samuel. And so when you study the passing charts from Jalen Hurts, and I encourage you to go to Next Gen Stats and look at these, you'll see that, and the analyst talks about this religiously, is what constitutes what a good quarterback is, according to the STS podcast, is you got to be able to hit the middle of the football field. You got to be able to command the middle, because what that does is that sinks in the linebackers, that sinks in the safeties, to where it opens up the hash marks. It opens up the numbers. And a lot of times quarterbacks can't do that. It could be a height thing. It could be a cognitive thing. It could be a processing thing. And it could be a scheme thing for sure. But for the most part, you look at Jalen Hurts' passing charts and you just see line of scrimmage throws towards the boundaries, under 10 yards. And that's the safest way to play quarterback in the NFL, the safest way. And it's almost like it's preventative maintenance for Jalen Hurts. But you go in and Jackson Dart is, 17 of 25, 195 yards, 1 touchdown on 13 carries for 58 yards and a touchdown. And I'm like, and Scadaboo's running for 98 yards with 3 touchdowns and trucking the shit out of players. And, that's CTE ESPN right there. That's your MVP candidate if you're a fan of Antonio Brown. But like, this duo it's exciting for Giants fans. And I'm glad that the Giants did their job against them. But obviously the Giants are not a better football team than the Eagles. Not even close. So how do you calculate a matchup like that in your power rankings? Well, it's like, okay, well, they slipped up, but they still have one of the most powerful rosters. They're 4-2. And then if you look in hindsight 2020, they nearly escaped the Dallas Cowboys in week 1 on a Thursday night football game to open up the season. And who knows where that game would have gone. I don't like doing hypotheticals, but realistically, if you've played it before, we played the game before, you're an hour and a half weather delay. That is a huge differentiating factor for a professional athlete, playing at that high of a level with that much exhaustion, with that much energy release, like that could have changed things. So, and then of course, being down 26-7 to the Rams and coming back and winning 33-26 in the second half after a blocked field goal kick. So, I understand that people are not very sold on them, so I moved them back to number 6 or 7 in the power rankings. And to the Giants' credit, like as soon as Russell Wilson came back onto the field, when Jackson Dart had to go to the medical tent, it was like night and day, the difference between production. And Jackson Dart, it doesn't have much to go off of outside of Tyron Tracy and Scadaboo in the run game. And Tracy is mediocre at best. I mean, he's kind of an asset to complement Scadaboo of all people. And then you got Lil Jordan Humphrey coming up from, that sounds like a Pop Warner coach. Lil Jordan Humphrey coming up from the practice squad. You got Jalen Wyatt, who's been an absolute bust since he entered the NFL. And Wan'Dale Robinson, who's 5'8". That's the weapons you're dealing with. And then like a second-year guy out of Penn State, Theo Johnson. So there's not much forecasting available for the Giants, but in retrospect, this was an absolute flop by the Eagles. And if it goes to show that if you get Jalen Hurts to throw the football, good things can happen for the opposing team. And then, you watch these London games, and I think the travel, like Denver and the New York Jets played at 8:30 in the morning. If you're living in the South, 8:30 in the morning for the London game, for the international game, and it's the final score of that one was a baseball score, 13-11. You're watching it, and nobody is converting on anything. It's stuffed at the line of scrimmage runs. I mean, I think J.K. Dobbins was 14 carries for 40 yards in the day. Bo Nix didn't eclipse 200 yards passing. It just was Justin Fields had less than 10 completions on the day. Garrett Wilson went down with an injury. Who else is there to catch the football? Mason Taylor only had a catch for 2 yards, and we thought he was kind of up and coming, and he very well could be. But just an absolute abysmal game to watch in the morning. And I was up, I was like, I got to get up that early and drink coffee and visit with the fam. And I was like, yeah, we got football on. Let's watch it. And we're all like, this is terrible. I'd rather be watching the morning service. But at the end of the day, Denver is 4-2. They have a win over the Eagles. They did their job against the New York Jets. They nearly escaped a loss, though. And what I'm finding out about Denver is and I said this last week, they're just continuing to struggle at finishing football games. And that's a concern. And that might be because they're they're led by a young quarterback, and it could be a semi-sophomore slump. But that AFC division with the Chargers and the Raiders and the Chiefs, I would argue the Chargers at full health are the most dangerous team in that division this year. But then at the same time, secondarily, you had the Chiefs getting back Rashee Rice. They were missing Xavier Worthy earlier in the season. Hollywood Brown, I think, came in either game 2 or game 3. I think he missed a game. Travis Kelce was struggling with drops. They still haven't found a run game. Isaiah Pacheco is averaging like 4.5 yards per carry on the year, but he's only getting 7 to 12 opportunities, and he's I don't think he's worth a crap, to be honest with you, to put it plainly. And I think they need to make a trade for a running back if they want to make a run at these things. But Denver has the potential defensively to really make some noise. And then offensively, you get J.K. Dobbins has been very productive on the ground. You got a great complimentary rookie back out of R.J. Harvey. Bo Nix isn't playing terrible. Obviously, you got a great head coach in Sean Payton. Lockdown corners, a pass rush, good linebacker play, some decent safety play. Like, the defense on the Denver Broncos side is what truly carries them, in my opinion, in what we had expected. But they have to find their wide receiver too. And I think they want it to be Troy Franklin, but without Cortland Sutton producing, you wonder where in the world it's going to go. And Evan Ingram is finally healthy, so that might help open up the middle of the football field. But very boring game, and I'm honestly, my shadow of the script take is I'm heavily against these international games because they don't put out a good product. And no one's getting up excited to watch a London football game. A lot of people forget it's even happening. And of course, I haven't had any interviews with the fans over there across seas that are saying, oh, this is amazing, we love the American product. Usually European countries and places like that are disgusted with what the Americans have to offer in terms of sports. But I could be completely wrong on that. I mean, anytime you hear like the World Cup or the Olympics, it's like, well, we don't like Americans. It's just the way it goes. So I'm actually shocked that they're making a push at international games and potentially an international team. But I've yet to see a fun international football game and also an exciting matchup. Like, it's 0-5 New York Jets versus Denver Broncos. Nobody wants to watch the Jets. And then the previous game was, the Minnesota Vikings with Carson Wentz versus, and it would have been J.J. McCarthy, versus, Aaron Rodgers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who's 41 years old. So it's like, okay, that's going to be a boring defensive ball game. Brian Flores versus Arthur Smith. Holy good Lord. That's probably going to be a 6-8 ball game. And you're wondering how the hell you get that score. But And it was a blowout that week until Carson Wentz kind of edged his way back into the game. So there's just not a lot of attention going into these international games, and I think that does a disservice to the NFL product. I think your product is best made in America, and bringing these games internationally is pointless. And it's a money grab, and I've never been a fan of it. So, and you know what? I'll speak briefly about the Dallas Cowboys versus Carolina. You know, we talked about the Giants defeating and upsetting the Eagles 34-17, and so you're like, all right, you're sitting there at 2-1 with your one tie being the Packers. You went to OT with the Giants. Your defense has been abysmal. You coming off like a blowout versus the Jets. All you have to do is do your job and beat Carolina. And evidently, Dak Prescott does not do enough to win the football game with 25 completions, 261 yards, and 3 touchdowns with no interceptions. Apparently, that's not good enough. 27 points isn't good enough. We told you what the mark was. We told you it's 35 points. You have to score 35 points a game in order to win a football game if you're in the Dallas Cowboys and if you are Dak Prescott. And it just was the possession they had at their own 46-yard line late in this game where they went 3 and out. I think they went -9 yards to basically end the game and get the lead. Just abysmal. And then on top of that, the atrocity that preceded that, that was even more of a, I would say, I'll just reiterate that the atrocity that preceded that was that the Panthers had the ball for like 8 minutes to close out the football game. And we were talking about it off script with the contributors about what would you rather have? Would you rather have an effective pass rush or an effective run defense, or a better secondary or a better run defense? And we all said run defense, because there's nothing more disrespectful than what the Panthers did to the Dallas Cowboys in the run game. And they didn't buckle up, as Rico Dowdle was hinting at prior to that football game. It's safe to say that he was very upset that the Cowboys didn't retain him in free agency and give him that shot. But, you know, Javonte Williams is doing just fine. Not head-to-head versus Rico Dowdle in this game, but Rico Dowdle had over 230-plus scrimmage yards, which was a franchise record for the Carolina Panthers. And he's had a franchise record over the past 2 weeks of total yards, and that's above Christian McCaffrey. Rico Dowdle, of all people. So he ran for 30 attempts, 183 yards. He had 10 rushing first downs, 4 receptions for 56 yards, and caught a reception touchdown. He ran all over the Dallas Cowboys defense and plummeted them into the dirt for 7.5 to 8 minutes to put it into the game and went off a game-winning field goal. Embarrassing. All you had to do was beat the Carolina Panthers, and you're sitting at 3-2-1, close to first place, if not tied for first place in your division. So now you're going to go play the Washington Commanders, who are above 500. Then you're following that up with Denver above 500, and I believe you enter the bye week. So an absolute collapse from the Dallas Cowboys. They have to go get 2 or 3 defensive players. They cannot rely on Overshown coming back in November near Thanksgiving or whenever it's going to be, and him being the player that he was. You cannot rely on that. You cannot rely on Kenneth Murray to play good linebacking. You cannot rely on Sanborn to be a good linebacker. You cannot rely on Sherman James to be a rookie plug-and-play effective linebacker. He's best as a gadget guy. And so there's a lot of concerns, obviously, with the defense. There's the speculations that they should get rid of Matt Eberflus. I'm a believer that if you switch defensive coordinators midseason, you're guaranteed not to win anything. So I don't really know what to do if I'm Dallas at this point. I have to think on that. But an atrocious lie, an abysmal loss to the Carolina Panthers for sure. Indianapolis continues to run at 5-1. Daniel Jones continues to put up very solid and efficient numbers behind Jonathan Taylor's efficient run game. I mean, another game eclipsing over 100 yards and just being that bell cow running back. When he's healthy, he's arguably a top 3 running back in the NFL, and that might not even be a hot take. But Arizona playing Jacoby Brissett, they got away with one there. It was still a close game, but Arizona's down really bad with injuries. They've lost Marvin Harrison, I believe, to a concussion. James Conner with a season-ending injury. Trey Benson went on the IR right after that, so they're rolling with Bam Knight and Michael Carter, who are both essentially practice squad guys or has-beens, and then Jacoby Brissett, who I want to say he's only 32 years old, but he's been in the league 9 years, always been a sustainable backup, and that's it. So Indianapolis did their job there. Funny how that works. And, this is when you get into like Seattle and the Chargers and New England, like this group of pair of like 2-loss football teams that have had good wins throughout this season. And I want to talk about Seattle's rushing game. Jackson Smith-Njigba is doing a phenomenal job leading the Seattle Seahawks wide receiver room, and Sam Darnold's putting up pretty decent numbers on the year. I don't understand splitting the carries the way that they do with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet averages like 2.4 yards per carry, if I had to guess. I mean, he had 12 carries for 24. Let me read his stat line so far this year. First game, I think, was his most efficient game running the football. He had 12 attempts for 47 yards, averaged 3.92 yards per carry, and had a touchdown. He's getting a 58% snap percentage. The next week, he's at 55% on snaps, 15 attempts for 10 yards, 0.67 yards per carry, 15 attempts for 10 yards. Did they not recognize that the first 8 carries weren't going anywhere? Missed a game against New Orleans, came back and ran 12 attempts for 39 yards, 3.25 yards per carry with a touchdown, and caught 2 passes for 5 yards. What are we doing? And then the next game, he has 9 attempts for 36 yards. They lessened his workload, and against Tampa Bay, he scored another touchdown. And then this past week, 12 attempts for 24 yards, averaging 2 yards per carry with no touchdowns and a catch for 13 yards. Like, I don't get it. And then you look at Kenneth Walker, who last game, like this game, he averaged 3.4 yards per carry, not much better than Charbonnet, but the weeks prior, he had 86 yards rushing, 81 yards rushing. He had 105 yards rushing in week 2. And so just astronomically confusing to watch Kenneth Walker, who's obviously a much better running back. And I know he's had injury riddles in the past, but he's clearly the better back. And fantasy managers and people watching, and just like the product of football, and from a coaching standpoint, I look at it and go, why aren't you running 60% to 70% with Kenneth Walker, and then complementing maybe some red zone or short yardage touches with Charbonnet? But they're not going to do that because it's too complicated, I guess. So at the end of the day, the Seattle Seahawks are doing what they're needing to do offensively to win these football games. They had a great win over Jacksonville. And then the Chargers are just so injury riddled, but I'm just happy they have survived at 4-2 once they get Amari and Hampton back. And I know Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston and these certain guys are battling injuries, and Najee Harris went down with another injury. Their tackles are out. Like, there's a lot, of course, that is happening with the Chargers, and it's such a Chargers thing to happen. But it's a shame because Justin Herbert, I hope they continue to get healthy and maybe patch up some things in free agency, and some younger guys start to step up. They have a product to go deep in the playoffs when healthy. So if they can just stabilize themselves with a winning record until those guys get back, the Chargers, I believe, are the most dangerous team in that AFC division. And then New England, man, like Drake May is playing out of his mind, completely out of his mind. He's got we got 3 touchdowns this week. That's 5, 7, 9, 10 total touchdowns, or 10 passing touchdowns on 2 picks. And then he's got 2 rushing touchdowns. So 12 total touchdowns and 2 interceptions on the year. He blew out Carolina, so he didn't play the full game there. But Drake May, second season in, really looking like what was promised, the prince that was promised, if you want to prophesize it. And, the build that he has, the physical mass, 6'4", I think over 225 pounds, 225 pounds to be exact. And they're still not giving the football to Tre'Davion Henderson. And it must be a playbook thing. It must be a pass pro thing. But Stevenson, 13 carries for 18 yards. Obviously, he's had a fumble problem since he's been on the Patriots over the past 2 seasons. Antonio Gibson, I believe, is out for a long time, if not the year. I believe he's out for the year. They got some young guys kind of starting to step up offensively for him. I think they should get another weapon because they can. If you're Vrabel, I would look at this team and go, man, we could use an A.J. Brown. We could use a DJ Moore. We could use one of these gadget receivers to kind of step up with Stephon Diggs and elevate this offense long term. And, on the flip side, I'll just note real quick that, Spencer Rattler obviously is like 1-11 in his first 12 starts, but he's not playing bad football. I don't think he's playing that bad at football, considering that they're 1-5. And credit to Kellen Moore's offense, but they're doing what they can. They're not very efficient on the ground. 10 carries for 31 yards, 8 carries for 21 yards between Alvin Kamara and Kendra Miller. Somehow, some way, Chris Olave is still healthy, which is a great thing, and I'm happy for him. Taysom Hill came back and had 1 carry for 1 yard and a touchdown. Like, the Saints are doing what the Saints have been doing for the last 4 or 5 years with Dennis Allen and now Kellen Moore. But obviously, they're in a rebuild. So, Aaron Rodgers with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're still in the top 10 on the STS power rankings. Aaron Rodgers at 41 years old is playing efficient football, doing what he's needing to do, not doing too much, not trying to be a hero, just playing efficient football. 21 of 30 on the day versus Cleveland, which is a very difficult defense to play against. Obviously, on offense, they've got Dylan Gabriel running things with Shadur Sanders as a backup, or it's either him or Bailey Zappi. Judkins is getting a lot of workload, which is good. He's been very efficient through his first 3 or 4 games as a starter. They obviously are also in a rebuild, but Pittsburgh is defensively is probably the scariest unit outside of the Denver Broncos. I would argue Pittsburgh is a stronger defense, but they've got a system. I mean, they've got Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell as a power and scat back combination. DK Metcalf is doing his thing. So I like what, obviously, I'll cover these last 2 games and I'll skip over. You know what? We're going to skip over straight to the Monday Night Football games after I comment on Tampa Bay's start to the season. They're number 1 in the power rankings. I have to talk about them. Baker Mayfield is MVP favorite so far this season. He's been explosive. He's making that play that he made in the pocket where he's breaking 2 or 3 tackles, jukes one player, breaks another tackle, and reaches for the first down on 3rd and 14 is incredible. That is pure Baker Mayfield fueling the team, leadership, grit, and that's something that you want to follow. And it's hilarious to watch, Chris Collinsworth talk about it on a Sunday Night Football game, saying, who else in the league does that other than Mahomes? Like, no one other than Mahomes does that. And you're like, that's not true. Earlier that day, we saw Baker Mayfield do that in a larger capacity and get the first down. So I don't want to hear that stuff. I do like Chris Collinsworth, but I don't want to hear that. The glazing is a little unreal. I have to agree with the majority of fans on that one. But Baker Mayfield is without Mike Evans. He just lost Egbuka. Chris Godwin was inactive for this game. Bucky Irving is inactive. I don't know how injury prone they are on defense currently, but under Todd Bowles is a great defensive coordinating coach. But Rashad White's filled in quite nicely as a replacement for Bucky Irving. Tez Johnson had I don't know if you guys saw this, but the throw itself was incredible from Baker Mayfield. The catch was even better for a touchdown. It was a 45-yard touchdown to Tez Johnson. But, they're winning that football game versus San Francisco, who has been very impressive with all the injuries that they have had. This is basically like the injury-riddled football game matchup. And I'm just highly impressed with what the Buccaneers are doing because they're still not at full firepower. And I am eager to see what they are. I think by the bye week, you'll see them at full capacity, and they'll row. And at 5-1, they can escape maybe at 6-2 and go into the bye week, and you're like, okay, here we go. Full firepower, Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers with Chris Godwin, Egbuka, Mike Evans, and Bucky and Rashad White all back ready to go. I think that's why I have him number one. I'm not much of a forecaster. I like to see what I've seen and evaluate from there, but for them to be doing what they're doing with all the players they're missing is extremely impressive. And then the Monday Night Football games, watching Detroit, it just seemed like a game that Kansas City was just ripe for the taking. It was almost an easy, like if I was a betting man, I'm like, the Chiefs are winning this football game easily. It just after going 2-3, they lost. They kind of coughed one up versus the Jaguars. Should have been 3-2. If they were 3-2 and going into the Detroit game on the primetime window, I would say that Detroit would have had a chance. But because they're 2-3 and 0 penalties were called on the Kansas City Chiefs that game, which is nuts, by the way. 1-800-GAMBLER, Vegas is calling. Hello. Yeah, that's probably why they won the football game as well as they did, 30-17. So. And Mahomes is playing like an MVP. Let's be honest. I know we don't like to hear that, but he is in the MVP talks. I would say he's second or third in the mix with Dak Prescott. But I'm not really worried about Detroit. I think they're still going to be high-flying, phenomenal offense. I think Jared Goff's playing pretty fantastic. I think they got to figure out. They got Sonic and Knuckles in a weird scenario where they're trying to figure out who's going to get the ball more. It's more of a hot hand, but I think when the Lions are at their best, they are using Jahmyr Gibbs on outside zone runs, any sweeps, jet sweeps, screen passes, and things like that. And then they're using David Montgomery in between the tackles to kind of bell cow their way through and numb the defense in the second half. But I think David Montgomery's going to need more than 4 carries to carry out that objective. So not too worried about the Lions. They're still in the top 10. I have them at just outside the top 5 on my STS power rankings. I thought about putting the Chiefs at number 10. Just to note that, they're getting Rashee Rice back. Xavier Worthy has returned, and Hollywood Brown being the second or third guy on that list. And I think they really have to get a running back. They really have to figure that out because they can't keep surviving with fat-ass Kareem Hunt and wife-beater Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, who's chopping his feet for 2-3 yards per carry, which, ironically, he's actually averaging like 4 to 5 yards a carry, but he's not getting opportunities. So I don't know what's going on there, but I'm not a believer in Pacheco, so I think they're using him to the best of their ability. Atlanta showing out versus the Buffalo Bills. I don't know what was going on. I know Josh Allen had a very bad day, nearly completing 50% of his passes, or just over 50% of his passes. James Cook had an efficient game on the ground, but they didn't get any red zone conversions. Penix didn't have to do a whole lot because Bijan Robinson, dude, 19 carries, 170 yards. He had 6 catches for 68 yards. He's practically wide receiver 2 for the Falcons until Darnell Mooney returns. But Atlanta is another sleeper. I want to see another 2 games from them before I can consider putting them in the top 10. I didn't like what I saw against them versus the Carolina Panthers, but Buffalo's in that same category with the Bills, or not the Bills, with the Lions. Buffalo and the Lions are pretty damn similar in terms of my belief in them. I'm not going to count them out. And what the Bills need and what nobody is talking about is that they don't have a wide receiver to throw to. They cannot live off of these gadget wide receivers. They cannot count on a Khalil Shakir to be the number 1 guy. It's just not sufficient. They have to find somebody via trade, in my opinion, to be a true contender in the league, but they are surviving nonetheless. So going into the bye week, we'll see them in week 8, and we'll see if they shake things up a little bit as the season progresses and they continue to evaluate their offense. So last but not least, I'll just comment briefly on the Washington Commanders, who I think are primed up for a loss versus the Dallas Cowboys coming up. I think the Cowboys need that win more than anything. But the Bears are winning in such strange ways, and it's odd to me because typically Dan Quinn does not play well against good teams or coach well against good teams, and then he dominates teams that are average or below average. And Chicago's average, from what I have seen so far, they're sitting at 3-2. I think one of those wins is kind of a gimme with Dallas's defense, but evaluating what the Chicago Bears have done this season, I did not expect them to win off a buzzer beater, and I believe, I think Chicago was, let's go back a week or so. I believe, I want to say Chicago was in another skirmish like that back in the day. Anywho, Ben Johnson is doing what, I don't know how they're operating without DJ Moore being efficient. They're not really giving DJ Moore a lot of touches in Chicago. That's why I believe he's a trade candidate, because they already got Rome Odunze, and Luther Burden is showing strong signs of growth, and they're running the football pretty well, and they're protecting Caleb Williams at a decent capacity. So, but at the same time, if they keep winning, why get rid of an asset? So I think if you're a fantasy manager and you got DJ Moore, you're just gonna have to roll with the punches and keep him on the bench, and just hope that when you have to start him, he pops off. But we've seen 5 games, he's not going to get the touches that he used to and that he needs to get. So that'll be interesting. But anywho, a lot to talk about next week. They got some fun matchups coming into week 7. You got Indianapolis and the Chargers. That's going to be a big time matchup. You get a divisional 325 game, Washington versus Dallas, Atlanta and San Francisco. The Monday night football game, Atlanta and San Francisco, is going to be your Sunday night game. Monday night primetime is going to be Tampa Bay and Detroit. I would say Detroit might get away with one here and steal a victory from Tampa Bay. And then later that evening, another doubleheader on Monday night is Houston and Seattle. So Houston is coming off a bye week and then gets an extra day of rest. So I think Houston can win that football game. I think Seattle's the better team, but I think Houston can win it. So we'll see how it transpires. But that is it for our NFL podcast today. I believe we are out of time. Out of time, I repeat. So I appreciate you guys listening. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday and Thursday for our college football and NFL episodes. This is the Shadow of the Script podcast. I'm your host, Jared May. If you're not following us on the socials and you made it this far in the episode, you can find us at Shadow of the Script on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And then TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter will be rolling out clips and our rankings for both college football and NFL on there as well. All right, thanks very much for the support, and I will see y'all next week.